Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. Up in just a few minutes, we have the Scandals segment brought to you by Revere Securities. And today we're chatting with Imran Ansari of Aidala, Bertuna, Kamins, otherwise known as ABK Law, right here in New York City. He's also a regular contributor and legal analyst on Law and Crime and Court TV. Today, we're chatting about the latest developments on Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho murders. Bryan Kohberger has been officially charged with first-degree murder and burglary for the killings of 4 University Idaho students. Roommates Xana, Kaylee, and Madison, as well as Xana's boyfriend, Ethan, were all stabbed to death in the girls' home between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. back on November 13th. 2 other roommates survived. Bryan Kohberger, who is 28, was arrested on December 30th in his home state of Pennsylvania. He was a PhD student in Washington State's Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at the time and was visiting his family in Pennsylvania over winter break. Authorities zeroed in on him in part by comparing DNA found at the crime scene with DNA of a relative of Kohberger's apparently obtained from the family's home trash. In my opinion, it is far too early to judge the strength of the prosecution's case, but the role DNA has already played has drawn renewed attention to broader issues around the uses and limits of this technology and scientific evidence more generally in the criminal legal system. Here to chat Idaho murders and where this case is heading is the amazing Imran Ansari. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Zen.
Okay, the big question. Do you think he did it, and is the evidence at hand enough to put him away?
Well, of course, Zen, any defendant enjoys the constitutional right and a presumption of imminent innocence before they are convicted in court or they enter a guilty plea. But the evidence, in my opinion, seems to be mounting against Bryan Kohberger, which led to his arrest. And of course, you mentioned that DNA evidence. That DNA evidence is going to be very key, Zen. This was a match based on a sample that was found at his Pennsylvania home to a sample taken from a knife sheath that was found inside the location where these murders happened. That match is going to be critical, and I think that there are probably prosecutors, that is, gearing up to take a sample from Bryan Kohberger himself. They're going to run that through a DNA test and database, and they're going to have a match, I presume, with that sheath sample and Bryan Kohberger. That is very critical evidence against Bryan Kohberger. Also, Zen, we have the cell phone data, the pinging of his cell phone, not near the location because they're alleging that he had the wherewithal to turn his phone off, but on a route going to the house and then away from the house. And also, Zen, I got to point that out. If, in fact, Bryan Kohberger turned off his cell phone to avoid cell phone data tracking, that also could be a consciousness of guilt that he knew he wanted to turn that off. Keep in mind, he is someone who has been studying criminology and justice. He wanted to turn that off so he could not be tracked. But of course, Zen, there is that evidence against him, including also that roommate who saw a figure, a shadowy figure that may have matched the description of Bryan Kohberger physically.
Just crazy stuff. So, okay, let me go back to this. So 4 a.m. on November 13th, this masked man breaks into a house about a mile from the University of Idaho campus and stabs 4 students. Then he walks past this stunned surviving roommate and left. And by the time police arrived, Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan, 2 21-year-old best friends, and Ethan Chapman and Xana Kernodle, 2 20-year-olds that were dating, were just basically dead, stabbed to death. But early on in the investigation, the Moscow Police Department became interested in the white Hyundai Elantra that surveillance footage had captured near the house that morning. And police compiled lists of white Hyundai Elantras spanning from 2011 to 2016 that were registered at local universities and instructed officers to search for this car. And now an affidavit, to my understanding, that was released on November 29, just 2 weeks after the crime, these techniques succeeded in identifying a 2015 Elantra registered to Bryan Kohberger. So at this point, my question to you is, with all this mounting evidence that you just pointed out, with the cell phone pings and the Hyundai Elantra and the DNA found in the knife sheath, my question is, how do they put this guy away with no motive nor a murder weapon?
Sure. So Zen, of course, and you made a great point by pointing out that Hyundai Elantra. That, of course, is another piece of evidence that could be linking Bryan Kohberger to the murders. But you got to remember that, you know, in a murder case, a homicide case, you don't always find the murder weapon. What is the first thing that we see those who have committed a murder do? They get rid of the murder weapon. So, you know, it's often that you don't necessarily have the instrument that may have caused someone's death. But you have to also look on another level here, which is intriguing, to say the least, which is the criminal mind and the psychology behind these murders. And if, in fact, Bryan Kohberger was the person who committed these murders, his psychiatric state. And what do I mean by that? You can see someone who's studying this line of work, right? Criminology, justice, and also has, you know, a background with psychology in this realm of criminal justice. And think about what he does. He posts on Reddit that study seeking to get information from those who may have committed crimes, and uses certain pointed language in these questions that he describes as a study for his research. He asks, you know, how did you achieve your goals, right? That's a very key word to use, a goal. A goal is normally, Zen, something that is positive, right? You're going to achieve a goal. If you want to dissect the mindset of Bryan Kohberger, what is he referring to as a goal there is a criminal act. So you have this really intriguing psychiatric background. You hear about his background as a high school student, as someone who was younger. He was a bully, and then he was also someone who bullied. You get this really intriguing psychological mindset that is going to be studied by prosecutors, by expert witnesses, to find the motive, if any, right? You may not have a motive, and prosecutors don't have to prove a motive. But I think that there is a deep psychological background to this. He's been described as possibly having incel personality disorder or something like that. And that's going to be part of the prosecution's case to really link why Bryan Kohberger may have committed these murders, allegedly.
Okay. So thanks for that clarification. But I want to go back and chat DNA, because this is where everything is residing on. So the approach used to identify Kohberger is just one of several recent developments in DNA analysis that have transformed the way law enforcement investigates crimes. But while these advancements present tremendous potential for law enforcement and criminal investigations, burgeoning new areas of forensic analysis also have shortcomings that underscore the need to proceed with caution and recognize that not all technological advancements are foolproof. So what do you say to this? Will the DNA recovered in this case and in the knife sheath left behind be sufficient?
So Zen, you know, when I was a prosecutor, I was actually in charge for my bureau as presenting the cases for indictment to grand juries based on DNA evidence. I was the designated DNA guy, if you will, and I got, I would say, possibly hundreds of indictments based on matches of DNA evidence. And then an arrest would be made either after that match, called an X indictment, or before the match if there was you know, the DNA evidence was had at the time of the arrest. So my point is that I would present cases, I would describe the accuracy of DNA, and I can tell you DNA technology in the criminal justice world is very, very strong. You know, you don't have necessarily, you know, a match as strong as what they are saying they had here. And I'll tell you what match they had. They found evidence outside the Kohberger residence, and they matched the DNA on the knife sheath to the paternal sample, right? So there was a paternal sample, meaning Kohberger's father that they matched it with. So that's his father, but that DNA travels down to Bryan Kohberger. And that's why I mentioned earlier, I believe prosecutors and law enforcement are going to be taking a direct sample. And I'm doing this because normally they take a swab from the mouth, but they're going to do a direct sample from Bryan Kohberger with that knife sheath sample. And I expect they're going to have a match.
Wow. So okay, so let's go back. So DNA analysis is, of course, a revolution in forensics, but like every form of scientific evidence, it has the potential for error. And I'm going to stress this. But at its best, DNA testing can tell you, you know, whose genes were found in a particular location, but it can't tell you how they got there. So an innocent person's DNA might be found at a crime scene because they brushed against the victim on the street, used the same doorknob as the perpetrator, or dropped a cigarette butt nearby. Right. That's my concern, because they're going to try to take this apart every which way they can. So I'm hoping that he gets put away based on this, because this guy is twisted, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, let's hope that this is strong enough. But let's go to the footprint, right? So now we know that there was a footprint found inside the home, and this could help police build their case beyond the initial probable cause affidavit. However, its value may depend really on what else detectives find with a series of search warrants followed by his arrest. Now, more than 2,500 miles from the crime scene, you have to see the removal of where, how many weeks have lapsed and how much time has gone by. But in this probable cause affidavit released, investigators revealed that a shoe print found at the crime scene had a sole pattern that resembled that of a Vans sneaker. How important is this shoe print?
The shoe print is going to be an important piece of evidence if it's in fact matching up with Bryan Kohberger's shoe size, if they find actually a similar shoe when they execute search warrants. You got to also keep in mind, though, that this house was a house of college students. They had parties. They had a lot of people going in and out and things like that. And that would be some arguments to maybe diminish that. But if there is a similarity, that's sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. And I don't mean that in any insensitive pun. What I mean by that is that there is pieces of evidence that the prosecution can link together and connect those dots. And when you connect dots of circumstantial evidence or forensic evidence, and you're able to hone in on the defendant, well, that's getting to proving your case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if that Vans shoe print, if they could somehow connect that either in size or actually with a shoe that they recover from Bryan Kohberger, well, that is another piece of evidence that could be mounting and connecting to place him at the scene of the crime and link him arguably to these murders.
Yeah. Okay. Very quickly, we have about 2 minutes left. This is such a disturbing case for me. I've never followed a case so closely and been more obsessed with the details, because I want this man put in jail. But I mean, me and everybody else around. But it doesn't matter, what I feel. It matters that justice is served, because these 4 families are suffering. Now, one thing that we don't have answers to is how he knew these girls. That's the big mystery still. So a surviving roommate told police that she saw this masked man with bushy eyebrows walk by her on his way out of the back door after hearing a series of alarming sounds. She told detectives that she thought she heard one of the girls say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." She looked out her door, saw nothing, and then told police she thought she heard crying from Kernodle's room. Then she said she heard a male voice, something to the effect of, "I'm going to help you." She opened the door again and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered this person's mouth. And she just told investigators that she saw a male, athletic build, but not muscular, about 5 feet 10 inches tall with bushy eyebrows. But she does not call police for 8 hours. Will the defense team ride this?
Yeah, perhaps. That is, first, that description, Zen, is such a haunting description when, have these pieces of what she's able to hear coming from these other rooms. What sounds to be, that at the time that these individuals are supposed to be murdered. It's very haunting, that account, and that shadowy figure. I mean, that's terrifying.
And you don't call police? And you don't call police?
That's the thing, I believe even law enforcement have been baffled as to why police were not called earlier. And there's some skepticism, or I should say speculation, as to why that may have been. Was there intoxication involved? Was, a passage of time, someone sleeping and not, there's all these theories of why that may have occurred. I don't think we have the answer quite yet. But what we do know is that is another piece of evidence that's going to be either used for the prosecution's benefit, this description. But could the defense attorney somehow exploit that to their advantage? I mean, it's very early on. We're going to have to see how the defense theory unfolds as we get more information.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're out of time. Thank you so much for piping in and coming on to discuss this. I know that we're not going to hear anything about this case again until their next court appearance, which is set for June 26th. But between now and then, we'll be watching closely and definitely be doing as much coverage as we can as more evidence comes out and more theories are surfacing. But thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Zen. Always great to be on with you.
Absolutely. Guys, listen, Kohberger faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and a felony burglary charge for allegedly entering the house with the intent to kill. Authorities have not publicly disclosed a potential motive. That was our scandal segment brought to you by Revere Securities, and that was the incredible Imran Ansari. You can head directly to their website, idalalaw.com, or you could head to the Instagram profile and check out Imran for all his incredible coverage on not just this, but all kinds of crime stories at Imran Ansari ESQ. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Revere Securities. Revere is committed to building a relationship of trust in which they work closely with you to help you define your objectives, explore alternatives, and choose the financial and investment strategies that are most appropriate for you. Go to reveresecurities.com.